We're now going to move on to the concussion study. I'll just give a little bit of a preamble here. In the last year, you know, all the news coming out of the NFL and everyone like that's been talking about concussions. We've all seen the tragic losses of people's lives like Junior Seau. And, you know, I was always saying, why aren't they talking about rugby? We don't wear helmets and we don't get as many hurt, we don't get as injured. And as an indirect result of that, I have been literally quite inundated with requests from various people to talk about rugby, to try to get access to you and our players to discuss rugby injuries, prevention, concussions, all these sorts of things. And when I say inundated, I'm talking at least once a week. So it's been very interesting, and I love the attention, but I didn't always trust people's motivations. These people that I'm going to introduce next, I know. Whitney Stoll is a Bates College player, and he played with me on Charles River for a number of years. He's playing down with Nova now? Or Washington Irish, sorry. So Whitney reached out to me. He's working for Philips Imaging, and they'll get into this more, but you know, he told me there's this new study that they're doing in conjunction with Boston University and the Department of Radiology there. And to that end, we have Dr. Alexander Norbash here. Any of you guys who've been watching any of the studies or reading any of the studies, you know that Boston University is kind of the epicenter for this kind of research. So they approached me. I was intrigued. We had several phone calls and emails about it, and they wanted to be here today, so I'm going to let them go. Thank you guys for coming.
And good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, the executive committee, for allowing us to come. And I know it's Saturday morning. I've been to these meetings before when I was up at Bates, and now I do it down in Washington, D.C. So thank you again, guys. My name is Whitney Stoll. I was president of Bates Rugby Club. Now I'm an executive officer down with the Washington Irish. And my day job is promoting rugby in the D.C. area, but also taking care of the 60 guys who play for me, which are all over in Ireland right now playing rugby, and I'm here on Saturday morning, you know, doing this, so I don't see the problem with that. But my other job is promoting you know, the welfare through Philips. Now Philips has been involved with rugby since the mid-90s. We sponsored the All Blacks actively, and we still do that. And we really want to look and promote welfare and know what's going on in the brain actively. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to pass it over to our VP of Enterprise and Head of Research and Development, Dr. Andrew Onbar. He's going to talk a little bit more about how this concussion study can really help you promote yourself, understand and where you're going. So I'm going to pass it on to him.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Among other responsibilities I have at Philips Healthcare, one of them is Brain Initiative, and as part of Brain Initiative, I have to worry about TBI, PTSD, and CTE. That is, in that context, I have reached to ACR, American College of Radiology, and to see what we can do for safety of the players in the sport in general. And since we had a rugby player in residence, we decided to start with rugby. To give you some idea how rugby is important to us, Philips is everywhere rugby is played, except Georgia and Namibia. So that is why this sport is so important to us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the partnership. This partnership is between Philips Healthcare specifically and American College of Radiology and Boston University. So the study will be done in Boston University. As far as the Philips concerned, we've been around since 1891. To give you some comparison, GE has been around 63 years. We have about 113, 14,000 employees, and we are in 120 different countries. We are one of the 3 major imaging system companies and medical device companies, among Siemens and GE, with Siemens and GE. And to show you the rugby, the number of NFL players, I'm sure everybody watch football in here. There are 32 teams and there are only 1,696 players. If you include all the football players, including secondary, high school, and all of that, there is only 1 million football players in US. More than 500,000 people play rugby in South Africa. So that gives you a comparison where we are as far as the sport concerned. What is the purpose of this study? The purpose of this study for us is basically very, very simple. To establish an image-based clinical protocol to give the players some visibility as to what is going on with their brain as a result of concussion, MTBI or mild TBI, and since you folks are not wearing helmet, and that even makes it more difficult or more susceptible, more difficult to diagnose and more susceptible to TBI and concussion. Basically, the idea is to make this study to be cost neutral to the players. The process is basically MRI, and Dr. Norbash is going to be the director of this study. It will happen in Boston University. The idea is to have a study between 18 months to 24 months. We haven't decided exactly how long yet. And we are looking for 50 to 100 players to volunteer for this study. And basically, you will have, after an imaging process, you will have a consultation with the neurologist and radiologist to tell you what is going on. And the timeline I already said, and we, as far as the cost neutrality, the players shouldn't pay. We are talking to a number of insurance companies, including Kaiser Permanente, to see if they like to participate in this. We are looking into the government for funding and also to the US Rugby as well. Now let me tell you a few words about the physician who is going to conduct or be the director of this study, Dr. Alice Norbash. I was in NIH on Monday. He was at the NIH in the same meeting. He is like a rock star among the neurologists. I don't know if there is such a term, so I made it up. He finished MD, BA, MD in 6 years. After that, he finished his radiology residency in University of Pittsburgh, one of the few who are neurologists and radiologists. It is important because you go to neurologists, they tell you something. You go to radiologists, they tell you something different. In his case, he's consistent. So, and from there, he became faculty of Stanford. From there, he established a neurosurgery and Brigham and Women Hospital in Boston. And from there, he had nothing else to do. He went to Harvard. He got a Master of Public Health. And right now, he is the chair of radiology at Boston Medical Center, Boston University. And I'm sure he is going to breeze through this presentation, so I wanted to explain a few of the things in layman language. He has made 430 national and international presentations, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy his capabilities. Without further ado, Dr. Norbash.
Thank you, Dr. Midvar. That's an embarrassing introduction. I'd trade a lot of that to be a decent rugby player. So I apologize. I'm not a rugby player. I wish I were. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how the brain works and how neurons work. I think you'd find that interesting. And I think you'd find that interesting because of what you're hearing about concussion. So I'm going to only take hopefully 15 minutes or so of your time. And the intent is, again, to look at how we can provide a safer playing environment for you and for future generations by better understanding what concussion means, how recovery can be enabled, and how we can get players back to playing safely at the right time. Does that all make sense? So I want to ask a question. How many people in this room have been knocked out playing rugby? Put them up high, please. I want to see that. Okay. How many people in this room have been diagnosed with a concussion either by somebody on the team or? Okay. So now I'd like to share with you this concept. If we don't understand concussion particularly well, I think maybe we're looking in the wrong places for answers. Maybe if we look at you as a group and a certain number of you as an initial group, maybe looking at 100 of you, and I would look at that as two different groups. A number of you would be followed normally. You'd have 6 or 7 scans over the course of a season from beginning to end, and some of those individuals might get knocked out or have a concussion in the interim. And so we could learn something from that. And a number of you would just present after a concussion for the first time, and we'd image you, and we'd kind of see the difference between a normal baseline and a non-normal baseline. So you can see the value in something like that using MR scanning, and I'm going to explain to you what we know about how the brain works and how we can image how the brain works, and I think you'll be hopefully surprised and fascinated. Is anybody in here a neuroscientist? No? Okay. Well, you see, the vast array of people who play rugby. Next, please. So you may think about a neuron as being a blob which has a bunch of spikes that come off of it. That's kind of the wrong image. Here's why. You have between 19 and 21, let's say 20 billion neurons in your head. You're losing 1 to 10 neurons every single minute as you sit here after the age of 30. And it's not right to think of it as a blob with arms. It's actually more like a Brillo pad. Why is that? Because each neuron has up to 10,000 arms that come off of it because it connects with up to 10,000 other neurons. So imagine how dense the packing is when you're talking about 20 billion neurons in your head, each of which has 10,000 connections with other cells. Isn't that amazing? Next, please. So we don't know much about how the brain works. We just know a little bit. And I'll share that with you. And that's why we're here to try to get your help. And we know a little bit about head injury, and I'll describe what we've learned in the past 5 or 10 years. And I'll talk about what we can do together as just one little tiny piece of a foundation that can hopefully layer with additional work done following so we can get a more fundamental understanding of how recovery from concussion occurs. Next, please. So I am the chair of this thing called the Head Injury Institute of the American College of Radiology, because everybody took a step back when they asked for volunteers, and I was left standing. So it's a great organization. I feel sometimes under-equipped to handle the ask. I represent 32,000 radiologists. And so what we want to do is we want to create an understanding of what is right and what is wrong when somebody has a rollover accident in Butte, Montana, if there's a radiologist somewhere out there who's looking at the head scan. So we have to educate that radiologist. We have to tell them how to look at the images. We have to tell them how they can educate the clinician about when that patient can recover from function and go back to what they were doing before if it involves rolling over their car. And so we standardize scanning by certifying MRI facilities. We come up with centralization of data. So we take all the information and we can centralize it and look at it and understand from large numbers of patients what's going on. And then we communicate back to physicians and patients what they should be aware of. And this communication gap is a big problem. The meeting that Dr. Ramit was talking about, we were in DC listening to a parent of a profoundly autistic child talking about his frustration with getting straight answers out of healthcare delivery people. He'd ask him, what can I expect? He couldn't tell if they didn't know, or if they were lying to him, or if they didn't care. And this was a repetitive thread that happened over and over and over again. Because the person who's delivering healthcare wants to feel like they're a resource, and if they don't know, they have a tough time saying, I don't know. This is the limit of my understanding or knowledge, and they don't know where to go to get additional answers. So our job is to learn this information, but then distribute it appropriately and disseminate it appropriately. Next, please. So again, we're looking ideally at this first phase at 100 rugby players over 18 months, and I'm going to leave a bunch of cards with Neil, and Whitney's going to be our intake function. We'll get the information out to you in terms of how you can volunteer to be part of the study. And we're going to look at you over 18 months. If you're very claustrophobic or if you're over 350 pounds, it's not going to be easy to get you in an MR scanner because we're talking about an MR scan study. And so we're going to make sure that you're not charged for any of this work, although we are asking for you to volunteer to do this. And we're going to leverage relationships with the National Institute of Health and with Kaiser Permanente to do this on a large scale. And Kaiser has something like 19 million covered lives. So if we can take this information and work with Kaiser to start looking at people who have all kinds of concussions for all kinds of different reasons, it's going to be really beneficial. Next, please. So how does the brain work? Well, the brain, you think about gray matter, which is on the outside, which is where the neurons live, white matter, which is central, and carries the information to the rest of the body, typically. So the gray matter is where your neurons are living, the important ones. But what we also know is beside the anatomy, there are a couple of other systems too. Well, there's electrical conduction, because each of these neurons and the arms that extend from it, they conduct electricity. And the conducting medium, it's not like copper in a wire. It's actually fluid. It's water that's surrounded by a thin onion skin layer of fats called myelin. And outside of that thin onion skin layer of fat is more water. So it's water suspended in water separated by fat, which carries electricity. It's really interesting. And in addition to that, this water flows, when it's healthy, in a normal direction that is in the same direction as how the electricity is carried. So that top right image you see, all those little orange strings, that's a graphic depiction of how water typically travels in the brain, and it reflects the pathways of the brain. When you wiggle your finger, there's a certain pathway that's activated from the neuron all the way down to the tip of your finger with neuronal connections. And in the bottom right, what you see is a picture called a functional MRI picture, or an fMRI picture. And what that shows is the moment-to-moment variation in blood supply to part of your brain. Because when you say, I want to wiggle my finger, the part of your brain that controls that, the blood supply temporarily increases. Or when you're closing your eyes and then you open it and you look at a picture, the part of your brain that controls vision, the blood flow temporarily increases. So we can make maps of the brain and how a particular task, listening to classical music, wiggling your toes, having a feather brush your arm, each of those things activates different parts of your brain, and we can see that with blood supply maps. And that's the bottom right image. It's called fMRI. Next, please. So again, this is a graphic depiction of water traveling, and this has become a very powerful tool for us. And this shows, it's called diffusion tensor imaging, DTI. You know, we have to make up bogus acronyms to kind of protect our knowledge. But the water flow pictures demonstrates for you what parts of the brain are functioning in a healthy way. So when you get a concussion, if it interferes with the electrical activity, it also interferes with the way the blood supply flows to part of your brain. It also interferes with the way the water flows within the brain. So think about all those systems and how they work together. Next, please. So again, a typical anatomic picture is on your left. The white matter is brighter, and it's on the inside. The gray matter is the thin ribbon that's on the outside of the brain, which is the important part. And on the right, you can see all these little tiny color-coded connections. So even when you wiggle your finger, there are a bunch of things happening that don't just fire off one little tiny point. It's a little bit more than that. Next. So the circuits are a little complicated, but here's what's interesting. If you get concussed, doing something simple takes you a little bit longer. So if I put a pencil down, you've just had a concussion, I say pick up the pencil, it'll take you longer to pick that pencil up. Why is that? Or it'll take longer for you to subtract 7 from 100 serially multiple times. Or it'll take longer for you to tell me the last 7 presidents of the United States. Why is that? It's because the signal is no longer coherent and focused the way it normally is. The 2 images on your left show a functional MRI, the blood flow image, in somebody who's healthy. The image on the right shows that after a concussion, it's a little more diffused. Your activity stream is not focal and it's not tight. So that's what we're trying to figure out. How dangerous is it when it's that diffused? Next, please. So again, what we're trying to figure out is effective recovery, playing at the right time, not leaving you out of play too long, and not bringing you back too soon. So both are important. Next. So what we're realizing is that when you have a brain injury, you know, we're learning this dynamically over time. So you've seen with NASCAR, they have these big neck braces now that they wear when they race, right? Well, one of the reasons they do that is because we realize it's not the first blow to your head with an accident that causes the injury. It's the vibration and the wobble. If I've got a bobbly neck, and if I hit a wall, my head doesn't just have one blow. It blows, it has a contra coup, and it keeps vibrating for a little bit. And each one of those vibrations is a mini concussion. So if you want to protect yourselves, develop a really strong neck. So next, please. What are the psychiatric effects of brain injury? You know about this: headaches, blurred vision, the light hurts your eyes. What we also know is that you can get a little angrier, you can get a little moodier because you're dealing with the difficulty in doing basic tasks, but also it independently affects your mood circuits. Next, please. And so if your head's crushed like an eggshell, you can see it on a CT scan on the left. If you have bleeding on the outside of the brain, like the central image, it's called a subdural hematoma, you can see that pretty easily too. If you have a large hematoma in the brain on the right, you can see that pretty easily. Next, please. But this is a little more subtle. The normal structures of the brain are shifted because there's a little bit of edema, and edema means water in tissues. You hit your thumb with a hammer, it gets swollen, that's edema. The fluid is in a place it usually doesn't live. And this is the same thing in the brain when it swells up after a stroke or after you get hit really, really hard. Next. This is a big bleed in the middle of the brain, that bright area in the pons. Next. And that's a little tiny dot. What's surprising is that little tiny dot of blood coexists with a little bit of edema, just a little bit. And that sometimes can be the harbinger of why certain things are out of whack, like your executive function, your ability to do multiple things at the same time are affected potentially by something that tiny. Next. This is an MRI rather than a CT that shows the same thing on the left. And on the right, all those little black dots that you see are tiny microscopic areas of bleeding that only MRI helps us see. So again, we're looking at structure, we're looking at function, we're looking at water flow, we're looking at electrical activity, we're looking at blood flow. Next. And this is kind of a subtle case that shows you the promise of MRI, and I'll wrap this up in a couple of minutes. You'll notice the image on your left, it looks pretty normal. You don't see any of those bright dots or any of the dark dots, do you? The image on your right is a color-activated map that shows you the DTI, the diffusion tensor imaging, or the flow of water in the brain. As you may notice this, there's a subtle area that's not green on the right side, even though it's green on the left. When we do a highly processed image, next please, you can see that the water flow is interrupted and the arrow shows it. So just that little area of interruption in the normal water flow can cause you to not be able to do serial 7 subtractions from 100, something that's simple. And that's the kind of stuff that imaging is really powerful with. Next. So again, we care about this space because it affects people's lives. And you may have heard about second impact syndrome. And all you have to do is go to the internet and you'll find a few examples of this. It's not very common, but it's tragic when it happens. And this is an example of a kid, Benjamin Robinson, 14 years old, in 2011 in Northern Ireland playing rugby. He had a severe head collision. He went back into play because, you know, you guys are stoic and you want to go back in, and I understand that. And 25 minutes later, he had another blow to the head and he died on the spot. And why is that? It's because the ability of the edema to be controlled in the brain with a second strike syndrome is affected. It happens to teenagers that are very young. It doesn't happen to us. But, you know, again, we need to understand these phenomena better and be able to predict them so something like this won't happen again. Next, please. And so, again, Anne McKee is this famous neuropathologist at Boston University who's done all this work. I'm just lucky to be at the same institution as she is. And again, what she's talking about is head injury is consequential when it happens to an unrecovered head injury system. So it's not a matter of having just one really bad blow, typically. It's multiple little ones where you haven't had a chance to recover appropriately. So we're trying to identify the recovery period. That's the bottom line. Next, please. So again, we talked about the collaboration. 100 players, 18 months, longitudinal MRI imaging, and you're not going to have to pay for it. Next. And again, it's all for these kids, right? It's all for the future of the game, and it's all for your mates, so they won't get hurt. That's what this is about, and I hope we have a chance to work with you on this.
Does anyone have any questions for the doctors that are here, or Whitney? That was, in my opinion, that was very informative. I think that's the most knowledge that's been passed around this room in, God, I don't know. But, yeah, Whitney.
Hey, so if anybody's interested, I'm going to leave business cards with Neil and also a sign-up sheet. So if anybody's interested, you can email me, or and we can just go from there. So everything will be with Neil. So Neil, it's on your shoulders.
So, are there any requirements for the people that you're looking to participate? Like, do they have to be active rugby players? I don't know, anything.
Yeah, ideally, yes. What we really would like a range of ages, and we want both sexes. Ideally, we have 50-50 men and women. But we'd like to have a stratified age range.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Guys, anyone else have a question for them? I really want to give them another round of applause. Thank you all for coming up.